Today, I'm going to share with you 3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I'm going to reveal the picture or pictures that are famously associated with them. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all I do. And I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So, if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button breakfast, but instead of powdered sugar, use baby powder on their French toast. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories. In early August 1945, warfare changed forever when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. These bombs would devastate the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 100,000 people. America's goals in dropping these 2 bombs was to hasten Japan's surrender and end World War II, as well as avoid any further Allied casualties. But America also wanted to showcase to the world, really the Soviet Union, that it had this new, extremely destructive technology at their disposal. So on August 6, 1945 at 8:00, the crew of the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the first ever wartime atomic bomb over Hiroshima, Japan. At the time, Hiroshima was a bustling regional hub that served as a military communications center, storage depot, and troop gathering area. When the bomb detonated over Hiroshima, immediately there was this flash of boiling light that scorched everything it touched. The blast burned at 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and the 70,000 people that were within 16 feet of the initial blast radius were instantly incinerated. After the dust had settled, 5 square miles of the city were just rubble. The Sumitomo Bank was within that blast radius. That morning, before the bomb detonated, an elderly resident of Hiroshima had been sitting on the front steps of the bank, waiting for the doors to open. They were clutching their walking stick and they had their other arm against their chest right as the bomb exploded. And when it did, they were one of the 70,000 people that were instantaneously vaporized. This Hiroshima shadow, as it's called, is all that is left of this person. Their shadow remained on the front steps of this bank for over 20 years before they finally removed that section of the stairs and brought it to a museum. In 2008, famous inventor Peter Madsen, along with a former NASA contractor, began what they called the ultimate DIY project in Copenhagen, Denmark. Their plan was to build a rocket ship from scratch and then fly it into space. This project made Madsen and his partner kind of like anti-establishment celebrities in Denmark. But by 2014, they still hadn't completed their rocket ship, and in fact, their efforts were stalled because Madsen and his partner had this really public, nasty falling out. And Madsen had actually left the project and moved literally across the street and set up his own rocket building project with a separate team. 3 years later, in 2017, a freelance journalist named Kim Wall, who was staying in Copenhagen with her boyfriend at the time, heard about the rival rocket ship makers and wanted to do a story about them. In the 4 years Kim had been a freelance reporter, she had traveled to places like Haiti to write about practitioners of voodoo, to Sri Lanka to document the tourism that goes on their former battlefields from their long civil war, and to Cuba to follow the underground network of people bringing TV and internet culture to the people. Kim was fascinated with what she called the undercurrents of rebellion, and here was just such a story, literally down the road from where she was staying. She desperately wanted an interview with Madsen, but he was proving to be very difficult to get in touch with. And as months went on and still no luck, she was starting to lose hope that she would ever get to do this story. But on August 10th, 2017, the day before she and her boyfriend were planning to leave Denmark, she got a text message from Madsen saying that not only would he do the interview, but he would do it that night while riding on his homemade submarine. Prior to being known for his rocket-building escapades, it was this homemade submarine that really put him on the map of famous inventors. Kim immediately said yes. This is exactly what she was hoping for and then some. The idea that she got to write from the submarine would only add to the story. Before she left, she asked her boyfriend if he wanted to come along, and he would say that he was really close to wanting to go. But their friends had thrown them this big going-away party cause they were gonna leave the next day. And since Kim was already not gonna be there, he told her he would stay with all their friends to make sure they weren't too upset, and that she should just go have a good time and that he would see her in a few hours when she got back. Kim leaves her apartment and heads down to the dock to meet Madsen. She and Madsen would get on the homemade submarine at 7:00 p.m. But before going underneath the water, Madsen thought it'd be funny to doctor past their apartment so Kim could wave to her boyfriend and all of her friends that were at this party. And so, they doctor past the apartment. Kim waves to her boyfriend and all the people at their going-away party. Her boyfriend would take a couple pictures of her, and then Kim would go back down into the submarine. Madsen would follow her, close the hatch behind them, and disappear into the ocean. Later that night, when Kim still hadn't returned, Kim's boyfriend started to get worried that something could be wrong. They did have a flight very early the next morning, and so it seemed odd that they wouldn't be back by now. And so he took his bike and he went down to the dock and he just waited for them. Then by 1:45 in the morning and still no sign of them, he decides to call the police. Police launch a search, and all night they're looking and they can't find the submarine. They can't get in touch with Madsen. The next morning, the submarine was spotted near a lighthouse, and one of the boats that was out looking for them saw Madsen climb out of the hatch right as the submarine actually sank into the water. So Madsen's now swimming in the ocean, and the submarine's gone under, and there's no sign of Kim. The boat goes over and picks up Madsen, brings him to shore. Madsen would tell police that he started to notice some ballast issues with the submarine and he thought it might cause it to sink. And so he took Kim to the surface and dropped her off at a nearby island. He went back down into the submarine to try to fix the issue. He said he couldn't do it, and he was only able to barely escape before the submarine ultimately sank. And if you just go over to that island right over there, you're bound to find Kim. But Kim was never on that island. This is the picture of Kim waving goodbye to her boyfriend and to the goodbye party. Right after this picture was taken, Kim and Madsen would go down into the submarine. Madsen would offer Kim coffee and cookies, and she would sit down in the control area while Madsen would step away, go into his room, and begin watching videos of women being beheaded on his computer. Shortly after watching those videos, he walked up behind Kim and beheaded her. 1 month later, Kim's torso would wash up on a beach, and her head would be discovered in a plastic bag along with a knife. It's unclear why Madsen did this, but he had previously tried to get other women to take a private ride on a submarine with him. Kim was just the first person to accept. Madsen was given a life sentence. In 1978, 16-year-old Bridget Geiger was waiting outside her home in Ohio for a boy named Jeffrey to take her to prom. She wasn't particularly excited to go to prom with Jeffrey. He was known to be really nervous around girls, and so she figured it was going to be a pretty awkward date. But nobody else had asked her to go, and she really wanted to go to prom, so she said yes. When Jeffrey showed up, she was immediately disappointed. He was wearing this odd ensemble of vest and beret, as opposed to the standard tuxedo that she was anticipating him wearing. And so now they weren't going to match. He was also so nervous that he was visibly shaking and couldn't pin her corsage to her dress, so Bridget's mom had to come out and put the corsage on. After the corsage was on, Bridget's mom would take a couple of very awkward photos of them kind of stiffly standing in front of her house before they ultimately got in Jeff's car, headed for the prom. When they arrived, Bridget wanted to go on the dance floor to see her other friends to kind of lighten the mood, because she was not having a good time with Jeffrey so far. But she did stay with him, and it was clear that Jeffrey hated being at the prom. He hated being around this swarming group of teenagers. Bridget felt kind of bad and said, "Hey, Jeffrey, do you want to go sit down and just grab a bite to eat over at the little food cart they have here rear?" Jeffrey's very relieved and says, "Yes, I'd love to do that." And the pair leave the dance floor and walk over to the little food court area. As they're about to sit down, Jeffrey pulls the chair out for Bridget. She sits down, he kind of pushes her in like a gentleman, but then, instead of sitting down with her, he just walks away without telling her where he's going her. Bridget assumed he was just going to the bathroom, but after a really long amount of time had passed and it was clear, He had not just gone to the bathroom, she got up to go look for him. And so she went on the dance floor. She can't find him in the building. And so she goes outside to see if maybe his car's not there anymore. Maybe he just left. And she sees his car. It's still in the lot. When she turns around to go back into the prom, she sees Jeffrey sitting on a curb just eating McDonald's cheeseburger. And she goes over to him and she's like, "What are you doing out here?" And so he told her that he just wanted to step outside and get a couple cheeseburgers and then come back and he would sit with her while she ate, but they wouldn't let him back in. And so he just went and got more cheeseburgers and thought he would wait here until she came outside. And now that she was outside, she couldn't get back in either. So she just says, "Hey, I'd like to just go home." And so Jeffrey is mortified and he tells her, "I'm so sorry. I wanted this to be a nice evening for you. I'm sorry it wasn't." He drives her home. He says goodbye. She walks into her house. He drives off, and that was that. Bridget only saw Jeffrey one more time after that. It was about a week after prom, and Jeffrey actually invited her to come over his house for what he was calling a house party. And Bridget's like, "There's no way this kid's throwing a house party. He can barely stand to be around just me, let alone a crowd of people." But she was polite and said, "Sure, I'd love to come to your house party." She gets there and there's no food, there's no music, there's like 3 people there. And as soon as she walks in, all Jeffrey wanted to do was have a seance and communicate with the devil. She was so immediately creeped out by Jeffrey's behavior that after only a couple of minutes, she just turned around and left his house party and did not see him again. Well, until 13 years later, when she would read about him in the newspaper. 13 years later, on July 22nd, 1991, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, police spot a man named Tracy Edwards running down the road in handcuffs. They run over to him and they say, "What's going on?" And he says that a man was holding him hostage in his apartment, that he threatened to kill me. I was able to overpower him and escape, and here I am. The police go to this apartment that he apparently escaped from and they knock on the door. The door opens and the police are confronted by this tall man who introduces himself as Jeffrey. He tells police this is all a big misunderstanding and that Tracy Edwards is a friend of his, and I don't know what's gotten into him. And the police were actually close to believing him. They would even say it was really convincing. But as they're talking to him, one of the officers kind of looks behind Jeffrey into his apartment and he sees on the coffee table what are clearly pictures of dismembered body parts. And so they arrest Jeffrey, and when his apartment was fully searched, a house of horrors is revealed. In addition to photos of body parts, the apartment itself was littered with human remains. There was several human heads in the freezer and the refrigerator. And in his bedroom was a 57-gallon drum containing more dead bodies that were decomposing in chemicals. There was also evidence that suggested Jeffrey was eating these people. Now, Jeffrey lived in a crowded apartment complex, and so other neighbors had complained about this awful smell coming from his room. He had been able to explain it away and convince everybody that it was just some bad meat. However, the most horrifying revelation about how Jeffrey was able to conceal these horrible crimes he was committing in the middle of a city apartment would come a few days later. Apparently 2 months before Tracy Edwards had run out of Jeffrey's apartment in handcuffs and flagged those officers down, another boy had left the apartment in handcuffs and was running down the road. And police stopped him, but the boy couldn't really speak. He wasn't able to articulate why he was there or what he was doing. And as police are talking to him, Jeffrey comes running up the road, flags the officers down, and thanks them for finding his boyfriend. They had gotten into a lover's quarrel and that everything was just fine. And so the police shrug it off and say, "No problem. We'll even give you a ride back to your apartment." And so they drive the boy and Jeffrey back to Jeffrey's apartment. They watch them go inside, and the police leave. If the police had paid a little bit more attention, they would have seen there was a hole drilled in the back of his head by Jeffrey. He had been pouring acid into this kid's head to try to control him, and that was why this boy couldn't speak. And as soon as the police let them go back into the apartment, Jeffrey killed the boy. Because Jeffrey, Bridget's prom date, turned out to be none other than infamous serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed 17 people over a 13-year period. just days after this picture was taken of Jeffrey and Bridget right before they headed off to prom together. Jeffrey would kill his first victim and start that 13-year killing spree. Dahmer was ultimately given a life sentence but was killed by another inmate. So, that's gonna do it, guys. Let me know what you thought of these 3 stories in the comments, and I will pin the best comment at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please offer to make the like button on breakfast, but instead of powdered sugar, put baby powder on their French toast. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Twitter or on Instagram. My username is the same on both platforms. It's JohnBallen for 116. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok. My username over there is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So, whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time. Guys, that's gonna do it. See ya. A couple days ago, I was researching topics for this channel, and I found this amazing true crime case from the 1980s. And I began researching it, and the first thing that pops up is HBO Max has just released a 6-part docudrama called The Murders at White House Farm, and it's covering this case. And so I'm like, oh, great. I'll watch the first 10 minutes of the first episode. It'll give me a good mental picture for the story when I cover it on my channel. And I hit play on the first episode and literally stayed up all night binge watching all 6 episodes. It's so good. The show is so good. I already knew what was going to happen and I loved it. The acting is incredible. They have 3 actors from Game of Thrones that are lead characters in the show, and that's a big deal. Game of Thrones is pretty epic to well. The next morning, I open my emails, and sitting in my inbox is a message from HBO Max saying, "Hey, we'd love it if you could help us promote our new show, The Murders at White House Farm." And I thought that was so funny. I'm like, that's a sign. So, I'd like to give a huge thanks to HBO Max for sponsoring today's video acts. The link to their brand new 6-part docudrama called The Murders at White House Farm is in my description below. But be careful if you click on it. It is a very addicting show. And if you're still on the fence about it and you're like, I don't know if I want to watch this or not. Well, the first story I'm covering today on my top 3 list is The Murders at the White House Farm. But before we get started, please invite the like button over to your house for a sleepover, and then, while they're sleeping, buzz a square of hair off their head. Alright, let's get into today's stories. At 3. Ajirawa. On August 7th, 1985, a very distraught man called the police and he said, "I think my father is in mortal danger. He lives down the road from me. I was just on the phone with him, and it seems like something is totally wrong. Can you please go check on him?" The police tell him to calm down and explain really what's going on here, what happened on the phone. And so the man, whose name was Jeremy, said his dad called him and he was talking about his daughter, so Jeremy's sister, and her name was Sheila. And he's like, "Sheila's gone crazy. She's gone berserk, and I think she has a gun." And Jeremy's telling police that he didn't know what his dad was talking about, and he's trying to get more information from his dad. He's like, "What do you mean she's got a gun? What's going on over there?" But at some point in this phone call with his father, the phone line just cuts out, and Jeremy's left with all these questions that have gone unanswered. He tried calling back, but it didn't go through, and that's when he called the police. The police asked Jeremy if he had heard any shots fired in the background before the phone cut out, and Jeremy says, "No, but my sister is schizophrenic. She's got a bad temper, and she had been fighting with my parents all week, in particular with my dad. And right before the phone cut out, my dad sounded really scared, like something bad was about to happen or was happening. And so, we need to get over there right now." And so, the police say, "Okay, We're going to check it out right now. So they hang up with Jeremy, and the police head down the road towards White House Farm, where Jeremy's father lives. They park a little ways away from the house itself, safely behind a wall and some trees, because they don't want to go too close in case Sheila really does have a gun and starts shooting at them. As the police are getting out of their vehicle, another car comes driving down the road from the same direction the police had come from. The police tell them to stop, and the person gets out, and it turns out it's Jeremy. He didn't live that far away, and he comes running over and he's like, "We gotta go in there. You have to go in there right now." And the police are like, "We're not gonna do that. You stay with your car." Before the police were prepared to go into this house, they wanted to scope it out and get a sense of what was going on, because they really didn't know anything about the house besides what Jeremy told them. So a small group of police officers goes behind this other building that's kind of adjacent to the White House farm, pretty close to the actual farmhouse. And they go around the backside and they peek around the corner and they start looking at the house. And it's still dark outside. There's a couple of lights on inside the house, and there's no movement, there's no sound, and they're just staring at it. And then one of the officers notices movement, or what he thinks is movement, up in the second floor. And the group of them back up behind the building. They didn't want to be seen. They were worried if Sheila saw them, it would trigger her to harm the other people in the house or harm herself. So they back up away from this building, making sure to stay out of sight of that second floor window and really out of sight of any of the windows on this farmhouse. They go back to the intersection where the police cars are and where Jeremy is, and they decide they're going to take the diplomatic approach. And so they call in a negotiator who, with a bullhorn, goes up behind that little building, and they start calling out to Sheila, trying to get her to peacefully put her weapon down and come outside. But there's no sound in the house. There's no more movement in the house, as far as anyone can tell. And this turns into a multi-hour-long standoff where no one comes out of the house, no one goes into the house, and then the sun comes up, and the police are starting to get frustrated, and so they eventually call the negotiator back and they say, "Okay, we're gonna need to make entry." A small group of police assaulters began making their way up towards the farmhouse. They get up to the door. It's locked. They try the other door. It's locked. All the windows are locked. And so they bring up a sledgehammer, smash in the front door, and they make entry into this hallway. They immediately make a right. They're getting ready to confront Sheila wherever she is, but they don't see her. They go all the way down this hallway and it opens up into the kitchen, and hunched over the stove is a man who's clearly deceased, who ends up being Jeremy's father. He had been shot to death and he's laying in the kitchen. So they find him, they scan the rest of the kitchen, and they look all around the first floor, and there's no one else down there. And this whole time, they're not hearing any other noises in the house, it's totally silent. They make their way upstairs, and as soon as they get to the top of the stairs, they go right into the first room on the right. And laying on the bed is a deceased older woman who's also been shot to death, and that would wind up being Jeremy's mother. Laying on the ground next to the bed was a woman who appeared to be in her late 20s, who would wind up being Jeremy's sister. So Sheila, the one who had gone berserk apparently, according to the father, she's laying on the ground and she has a rifle that's over her chest, and the barrel is pointed up towards her head, and she has a gunshot wound that's going in underneath her chin. And so she's deceased as well. The police leave that room. They go across the hall into another bedroom, and when they go inside, they find two more bodies that are both laying in their beds. They were 6-year-old twins. They were Sheila's sons. They'd both been shot to death as well. After that, there was nobody else in the house. So all of the family has been wiped out? Very quickly. This case was labeled a clear-cut murder-suicide perpetrated by Sheila. She had a history of mental illness, she had apparently gone berserk that night, and she had a gun. Everything fit. And so, the police were ready to just write this off as a murder-suicide, especially with the amount of media attention this case got. There was a lot of pressure to just solve this case and move on, and so murder-suicide became the answer, and they were not looking for any other answer. But there was one detective that was not willing to accept that this was clearly a murder-suicide, and he had a couple reasons for it. The first thing he noticed, cause he was there when the bodies were discovered, was Sheila was carrying a rifle, that had a 10-round magazine. And Sheila did not have any pockets on the clothes she had on when they found her. That's important because she fired 25 shots, so that required 2 reloads. Except the ammunition to this gun was downstairs, and a lot of the shooting happened upstairs. So, after her first volley of fire on the second floor, where presumably you have at least a couple people that are still totally alive, she had to walk downstairs, reload the gun, come back upstairs, do her second volley of fire, go back downstairs, reload that second time, and then she finishes her course of fire. And it made him wonder, why didn't anybody try to stop her while she was doing the reload? Because it required going all the way down, getting the rounds, jamming them into the magazine, putting it into the gun, and then going back upstairs. That's a lot of time that other people could have potentially tried to stop her or, at a minimum, just tried to escape. But it was like everybody just laid in bed. It was like they didn't know what was happening despite so many rounds being fired very close to them. Stan also found out Sheila did not have extensive weapons training, and so she wouldn't be natural at reloading a weapon. And so for her to go down and reload twice and not chip any of her nails, she had long painted nails that seemed like a bit of a stretch because that requires pretty coordinated movements. And for her to never have done that before and just to be able to easily reload that seems like a stretch too. Stan also figured out there was a window that had a faulty latch on it, that if you pulled lightly on it, it would stay locked. But if you pulled hard and kind of jostled it around, it could open and it could shut. Which means the house was not secure when they got there, even though they thought it was. And that was a big part of their whole this is a murder-suicide because she locked all the doors and windows before she committed this crime. But if any of those doors or windows were open, it kind of leaves open the opportunity for someone else to have gotten in there and gotten out before the police. But the biggest discovery by far that puts all the others to shame is something Stan found under the stairs inside the house. And everything before that, all the evidence that Stan was presenting to the other officers saying, "Hey, we should take a look at this. I don't know if this is a murder-suicide. I think there might be potential for somebody else to be responsible." Well, no one was taking him seriously until he came to the table with what he found underneath the stairs. Everybody had to stop what they were doing and say, "Okay, yeah, we need to look closer at this." And so if you want to learn more about that, go ahead and click on the link inside of the description. It will bring you to the landing page where you can watch the series that I've been raving about. It's on HBO Max, and it's called The Murders at White House Farm. And it does a great job of showcasing this huge find and then the follow-on plot twist. On the morning of November 13th, 1974, 6 members of the DeFeo family were asleep in their home in Amityville, New York. The 7th member of the family, Ron, was sitting on his bed in the basement. At around 1:00, he gets up off his bed, he grabs a rifle, and he starts walking up the stairs. He goes across the first floor, goes up the second floor stairs, and he gets to the second floor landing and he walks right into his parents' bedroom, which was totally dark besides this little candle that had been lit next to his father's bedside. And he raises his rifle and he puts 2 rounds into his father's back, and then as soon as his father is still, he aims at his mother and he shoots her 2 times. Then, he puts the gun down and he walks out, and he goes across the hall into his brother's room. He raises his rifle and he fires 1 shot into his 12-year-old brother, Mark, and then he aims at his 9-year-old brother, John himself, and he fires 1 shot into him as well. Then he leaves their bedroom and he walks down the hall to another bedroom where he finds his 13-year-old sister, Allison. He raises his rifle and he fires 1 shot. He leaves her room, he goes up the 3rd set of stairs up onto the 3rd floor, finds his 18-year-old sister, Dawn, and he fires 1 shot into her. And then he was done altogether. It took Ron about 15 minutes to massacre his family. At no point was he panicked or running around or acting crazy. He was just walking calmly room to room, taking very well-aimed shots to ensure they didn't get up again. He put the rifle down and he went outside and he jogged to a bar, where he went inside and he put on this big facade that he had just found his family and they were hurt and could you come help him. And when they got to the house, he refused to go inside, but the people from the bar went inside and they discovered this horrible scene. And when the police show up, Ron goes over to them and he actually confesses and says, "I killed my family." Even though the DeFeo family had a reputation for being very dysfunctional, it was Ron who had the worst reputation. He was known around Amityville for heavy drug use, for being a total alcoholic, and for getting really aggressive and confrontational with people. He was just a guy no one wanted to be around. And so when news got out in Amityville that this horrible thing has happened, it looks like Ron is the one who did it. No one was really that shocked. But when details of the crime scene, specifically the way the bodies were positioned, made people wonder, is there more to this case that we don't know about? All of the DeFeo family members had been found lying face down in their beds, and none of them showed any signs of putting up a struggle against their attacker, which led investigators initially to think that they must have been sedated, that Ron must have drugged them somehow before he carried out this attack. But when the toxicology reports came back, no one in the family had any substance in their system. At first, the police did not think that was a very big deal. They figured, you know what? The family just must not have heard the different gunshots. He wasn't shooting lots of rounds. It was, one single round here, one single round here, one single round here. That perhaps they just didn't hear it, and that's why no one tried to escape. But it turns out the rifle Ron was using, the .35 caliber Marlin, is one of the loudest rifles you can own. And in fact, investigators went out and did a test with it, and they fired it indoors and you could easily hear it a mile away. And so investigators said, well, then it looks like they must have heard these gunshots, but for some reason didn't get out of their beds. They didn't try to fight back in any way. They just kind of took it. And then you have the weirdness of Ron's confession. On the night of the attack, when Ron is sitting on his bed and he can't sleep and everybody else is asleep upstairs, he starts hearing a voice in his head that's saying, "Catch them, kill them." And he thinks he's just losing his mind. But then out of the shadows, straight across from him from underneath the steps in the basement, this shadowy figure emerges and starts walking towards him. And he can see what looks like its mouth moving and saying the words, "Catch them, kill them." And Ron's looking up at it as this figure walks all the way up to him and bends down and gets right next to his ear. And he says right into his ear, "Catch them, kill them." And then Ron said involuntarily, he reached over to the rifle that was on the bed with him, and he stood up and he began walking towards the steps. And he knew what was going to happen. He was going to go kill his family, and he didn't want to do it. But he felt like he didn't have any more control over his body. And that's when he realized he was being possessed by this demon in the basement. Well, Ron's confession terrified everybody in Amityville. The idea that there was a demon living in the basement of this house that possessed someone to go kill their family. That terrified everybody. But it didn't hold up in court, and ultimately Ron was sent to jail for life. 1 year after the attacks, another family, the Lutz family, moved into the house in Amityville, but they left 28 days later because they were hearing voices coming from the basement. After hearing about the mass murder that occurred in the house, and now the Lutz family saying that there's something in the basement, world-renowned demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, they descend on the property. And very quickly, Ed and Lorraine say, yes, this house is definitely haunted. And in fact, to this day, the Amityville house is considered one of the most haunted places in the entire world. But while Ed and Lorraine were there, they took a very famous picture. Lorraine was walking around the second floor near where the brothers' room was, and she was snapping pictures. And the only people in the house at the time these pictures were being taken were her and her husband Ed. And here is the picture that she took on the second floor. She claims this boy standing on the left side of the picture is the ghost of John DeFeo. Today, the house still stands, and it's been bought and sold a number of times over the years because, apparently, no one likes to live in this house for a very long time. On June 10th, 1912, the Moore family was sleeping peacefully in their beds on their quiet street in Villisca, Iowa. Joe and Sarah Moore, the mother and the father, were asleep upstairs in their room, and their 4 children were down the hall in another room. In addition to the Moore family sleeping upstairs, there was also 2 more children sleeping on the first floor in the guest room. It was the Stillinger sisters, and they were over for a sleepover. And unbeknownst to all the sleeping people in the house, there was a strange man who had broken into the house while they were at church, gone into the attic, and was hiding in there, smoking cigarettes and carrying an axe. Shortly after midnight, the stranger believed the coast was clear, and they silently opened up the small door and they crouched down and walked out of the attic into the second floor hallway, wielding this axe in their left hand. They began walking down the hallway. They passed the children's room on their right and they made their way down to the end of the hall where the master bedroom was. They walked inside the room and stood right next to Joe and then violently raised the axe over their head, so quickly and so high that it actually struck the ceiling and then brought it down, blade first, directly onto Joe's face over and over and over again until Joe did not resemble a human being. While this was happening right next to her, Sarah is beginning to stir and look around. What's going on? Meanwhile, the killer has now moved to the other side of the bed and is standing over Sarah and using the backside of the axe, so not the blade part, but the backside of the axe head. He raises it up and then brings it down on her head and repeatedly hits her over and over and over again until she, too, is indistinguishable and does not look like herself or even human. The killer is very calm. He takes the sheets and pulls them up over the faces of both of the people he just killed. And then he goes back out into the hall and he walks down and he goes into the children's room. One by one, he raises the axe and drops the axe on each of the children's heads. And then, after they are deceased, he pulls the sheets up over their head. The killer leaves the room and goes downstairs to where the Stillinger sisters are. And then, just like everybody else in the house, he raises the axe and drops it over and over and over again on the heads of each of these girls until they're no longer living as well. Afterwards, he raises the sheets over their faces, and now everyone in the house is deceased and has their face covered. At this point, the killer goes back upstairs and goes back into the master bedroom and he stands in front of Joe and Sarah's bed, and after a little while, he begins striking them dozens more times even though both of them were clearly deceased at this point. At this point, the killer shifted gears and began focusing on covering his tracks, cleaning up, and he began taking clothes out of closets and pulling whatever sheets he hadn't used. He began packing these things up onto all of the windows and any spaces on the doors so that nobody could see in. He also began covering up the mirrors, which no one understood why he did that. After the house is totally covered up, the killer goes into the kitchen and he cooks himself a meal, but he doesn't eat the food. He cleaned off the axe and placed it up against the wall on the first floor. He then took a huge bowl, filled it up with water, and then washed his bloody hands and began to clean himself a little bit. And then he left the bloody water just sitting on the counter. And then strangely, he took a huge slab of bacon from in the kitchen and he put it in the middle of the floor. And then next to it was a kike. And some people think this might have to do with some ritual he was performing, but to this day, no one really knows why he did that. And then he took some keys from inside the house, walked out the door, turned around, locked it behind him, and disappeared. The Moore household normally was a very rambunctious place with all these kids running around, and the neighbors were very close. And so the next morning, when the neighbors did not see the Moore family coming outside to do their chores around 7, they were concerned, and they went over and they knocked on the door. There was no answer. They noticed everything had sheets over it, so they couldn't see inside. And so Joe's brother was hailed to the house, and he brought along the key and he opened up the door and he walked inside. And he immediately saw the Stillinger sisters and what had been done to them. And he got incredibly sick and he ran outside and they called police. Police come down and they find this horrible scene. Even though they have the murder weapon, they have the victims, their bodies are right here, right? Blood. There's all sorts of stuff and things that the killer must have manipulated. And you would think there's enough here that you'd be able to refine your search to a couple different suspects and eventually figure out who did this. But they weren't able to, and to this day, we have no idea who did this. The house itself where the attack happened has not been updated since the attack. Somebody bought the property and then maintained it so it could be a tourist attraction. And so to this day, you can go to the Villisca Axe murder house and you can stay there. You can sleep there overnight and you can actually tour the area, and it looks the same way it did when the murders happened. Many people believe that house is haunted, and in fact, in 2014, someone who was there staying overnight as a tourist inexplicably stabbed themselves and had to go to the hospital, and they don't even know why they did it. And so, that's kind of added to the legend of the Villiscax murder house, that the house itself will cause you to harm yourself. So that's gonna do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you found the secret in today's video, please tell us in the comments what it is and where you found it. And if you're the first to do that, we will pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please invite the like button over to your house, and while they're sleeping, buzz a small square of their hair off. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok, where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. Remember to click the link in my description to go watch The Murders at White House Farm. It's an awesome show. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's gonna do it. See you! Today's video is a reminder that there are horrible people on the internet that will take advantage of you if you're not careful. And so, who better to sponsor today's video than NordVPN? NordVPN masks your internet identity, allowing you to surf the internet anonymously, protecting you from things like cyber scammer, identity theft, and hacking you from hacking. When I was in the SEAL teams, they made us use a VPN anytime we were traveling. And so I used NordVPN pretty much the whole time I was in the military. And then, when I got out again, I just kept using it because I became so accustomed to protecting my identity when I was online. And now is a great time to sign up for NordVPN if you're not already, because we got you a 68% discount. That means it'll be like $3 a month. And if you sign up now for the 2-year plan, they will throw in an additional month for free, and there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. So there's virtually no risk, besides you not using the VPN and getting taken advantage of. So, if you want to protect yourself against some of the creeps that I'm going to talk about in today's video, click the link in my description, that is NordVPN. MrBallen, or use the code MrBallen. That is again, NordVPN, MrBallen, or use the code MrBallen. Also, I just found out the like button does not use NordVPN, or any VPN for that matter. So please hack their computer and steal their identity. Alright, let's get into today's stories. In 2018, a 21-year-old, brand new police officer named Derek was dumped by his longtime girlfriend. This breakup caught him by surprise because he had actually just recently moved to Colorado in order to be closer to his girlfriend, so naturally, he was devastated. After a few weeks of being so depressed, and kind of just moping around and going through the motions in his life at this point, one of his very close friends suggested to him like, "Hey man, look, why don't you just make a profile on Tinder, the online dating service, and just put yourself out there again? You have no idea who's out there. Clearly, your ex-girlfriend was not the one." Derek had met his ex-girlfriend in a bar, and every other girlfriend he had ever had he had met in person, so online dating was definitely not on his radar. But he was so lonely and sad, he figured, you know what? I got nothing to lose. And so, he made himself a Tinder profile. Derek quickly matched with a woman on Tinder named Leah that he said was way out of his league, but he wasn't complaining. They chatted for a couple of weeks and they got on great, and so they wanted to get together and actually meet each other in person. But Leah lived well over an hour away from Derek's. There wasn't a natural meeting place, and they're going back and forth about where they want to go. And finally, Leah just says, "Hey, why don't you just come to my town? There's this great park that I go running in all the time. And they have this awesome field that's on a slope, and you can lay on it and look up through the trees and you can see the stars. And so, that would be a cool thing to do on our first date? Go stargazing together." So the date night finally came, and Derek was really excited. He was nervous too, because even though they've talked on the phone, this is the first time they're gonna see each other. And so the plan was, he was gonna drive out to her town and actually pick her up from her work. She worked at a hair salon, and from there, they would make their way over to this park. And so, Derek pulls up to the hair salon right as Leah is coming outside, and she's all excited and she's waving to him. She runs over and she gets in the car, and they hug and kiss on the cheek. And it's like they knew each other, but they didn't know each other because their entire relationship was on minor, via texting or a phone call. And so it's like they had history, but they didn't. But either way, Derek was really happy, and it seemed like Leah was too. From the hair salon, it was a pretty short drive to this access road that was gonna bring them into this park. And when Leah told him to make this turn, it didn't look like a very well-marked trail or even a marked park. It looked like this kind of random access road that Derek would not have associated with a big public park. But he doesn't know the area, and so he turns and he starts heading down this road. And the road went from cement to dirt pretty quickly. And this whole time he's thinking to himself, did I take a wrong turn? Does she know, where she's going? This does not feel like the way you drive into a big park, the way she was describing. Finally, they land back on cement and they're actually on this road that's right up against this huge field. So right away, Derek's stress is gone because now it's confirmed in his mind that, okay, that's a weird way to get into this park, but here's this huge, amazing field, and we're back on a real road and everything's good again. Derek asks Leah, where should I park? Because they're on this really narrow road and there didn't appear to be a parking lot. There also didn't appear to be anybody else on this field or on this road. It's this huge, open, beautiful space. But it did not look well populated or like it was well traveled. But she said, just go right up there. There's a small lot you can pull into it. And so Derek starts going up this road, and he sees maybe 300 feet ahead of him are dim headlights of another car making their way down the road towards him. And now it was dark enough that he couldn't really make out what kind of vehicle it was. And so he didn't know if it was going to be some big truck or something like that. And so what he did is he just pulled over as far to the road as he could to allow this vehicle to pass, even though there was a fair amount of distance they would need to cover before they were passing him. He figured just give them the right of the road. And so as they start moving forward, you can see that it's actually this big van, and they're moving pretty slowly. And he's just kind of waiting for them to pass. And he's not thinking anything of this. He's thinking that this is just another person at the park. And this van, instead of passing him, actually turns at the last second and almost goes bumper to bumper with Derek's car. He doesn't crash into it, but he stops just in front of Derek's car. And so, Derek is a cop. He's a brand new cop and he's super aggressive, He really believes in his training. And so, as soon as this guy stopped in front of him, unblocked the path for him, red flags are going up for Derek. And he knows something's wrong with this van. And instinctively he says, Leah, stay here. He grabs his flashlight that he kept right in the center console, and he jumped out of the car and went straight to the driver's side door of this van to confront this guy. And when he got up to the driver's side door, it was this really big guy who looked pretty startled to see Derek come charging up to him with his flashlight. And Derek's like, what are you doing, man? What are you blocking me in for? And the guy's like, oh, hey, sorry, I'm the caretaker here of this whole property, and we've had an issue with poachers in the area, and I was concerned you guys were poachers. It doesn't look like you're poachers, though. And Derek's like, no, we're not poachers. We're going stargazing. I'm on my first date here. And the caretaker's like, I am so sorry. Please get back in your car going and enjoy your night. And at that, he backed up, did a 3-point turn, and drove right back up that road where he came from and disappeared down on the other side of the hill. Derek stood in front of his car for a couple of minutes, making sure this guy was gone. And then he turned around and he got back in the car and he kind of joked with Leah. He's like, yeah, he thought we were poachers. I guess you look like a poacher to him and that's why he stopped us. But when he looked over at Leah to react to his hilarious joke, she wasn't paying attention to him. She was just furiously typing away on her phone, which Derek did think was a little bit odd. You'd think that she'd be more interested in this strange thing that just happened. Some weird guy just blocked us and I'm confronting him. You'd think she'd be interested in that on some level. She might want to know what I said to the guy and what he said to me, but she didn't seem to care. She was just really invested in whoever she was typing on her phone. And so Derek thinks whatever and just throws the car back in drive and continues up the trail the way they were going before they were stopped. So Derek continues down the road just a little ways until he sees a little dirt lot that's butted up against this huge field they're going to be hanging out on for the night. And so he pulls into the lot, backs into a space, and he and Leah get out, and they put a blanket out right next to the cart, but on the grass on the hill, and they get their food out and their wine out, and they sit down and very quickly they start swapping stories. And they're laughing and they're stargazing and they're having some wine and everything's really great. After about an hour, it's totally dark outside, and Derek is laying on the hill, facing back towards his car and towards the road they were on, and he notices to his left, up at the top of the hill, so the same area where the van had come from originally and where it went back to after they spoke that one time, Derek is looking out there and he sees headlights. And it's the van. And now the van is driving down the road. Not leisurely like it was before, but they are flying down the hill. And before Derek or Leah have a chance to react to this van barreling down on them, it comes flying into the parking lot and practically hits his car and comes to a stop where it's boxed his car in. So even if he got in his car, he couldn't drive away. And so Derek jumps up, Leah jumps up, and the guy, the caretaker. The nice caretaker we talked to before, he hops out of the driver's seat and he walks around the front of the van. He's got this pipe in his hand and he looks at Derek and he's like, "Give me your keys and your wallet." And again, Derek is this brand new cop, you know. He's 21 years old. He's not about to let this guy push him around. And so he doesn't do anything at first. He doesn't know what he's gonna do, but he doesn't do anything at first. He just looks at this guy and he shows him that I'm not just gonna fall over because he told me to as he told me to. But then Derek is given a huge curveball when Leah, his date, stands up and runs over to this guy and stands next to him and turns around and looks at Derek and goes, "Come on, give us your keys and wallet." And Derek's like, "Great. I'm getting set up by my date, who I've spent the past 2 hours with, who had a connection with this girl." And so now Derek is just standing there doing nothing, not to be tough, but because he's in shock. He feels so betrayed by Leah, and he just feels like, how could this have happened? And in that moment, Leah walks to the back of the van and she gets a metal pipe. She comes back around and she goes, "Derek, give us your keys and your wallet. We don't want to have to hurt you." And this is when Derek looks at them both and he goes, "No." And as soon as he said that, the big guy tackles him. He gets thrown to the ground. But Derek could handle himself. And very quickly he was able to get up and he drew his concealed carry pistol. And he's aiming it at the big guy and then back at Leah. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm a cop. Go ahead and put your hands up." Now, as soon as they saw the gun, they both dropped their pipes and put their hands up. And so as he's holding them both at gunpoint, he's looking over at Leah like, "Really? You did this to me? Are you kidding me right now?" As he's doing that, he has to get his cell phone out of his pocket, type in 911, and then call dispatch and had to say who he was about, what his badge number was, what happened, and where he is. And where he is was difficult to describe. So as he's trying to explain these directions and he's saying, "Yup, go left at the light and then there's a gas station. There's a station there. You're gonna go up this field. You're gonna see me. I got these two people at gunpoint." As he's doing that, Leah and the caretaker look at each other and they just turn around and bolt. They figure he's distracted. We can at least get behind the van and run into the forest before he's gonna catch us. And so instinctively, he takes off running after them, and he chases them for about 30 seconds into the tree line before he starts hearing gunshots. And they weren't his. Someone shooting at him. And he sees the muzzle flash out in the middle of the forest and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not doing this." He turns around, runs back to his vehicle, he starts it up, and he has to basically smash into the van, back into the fence over and over again, like Austin Powers, like a 25-point turn. before he was barely able to grind his way out and peel out of this park. And so Derek pulls into the nearest gas station. He calls up dispatch and he says, "Hey, I just called 911 like 10 minutes ago and I dropped the call cause I was chasing somebody. Here's my name, here's my badge number, I'm now at this gas station. Can you send a couple of police officers over to my location now?" And they said, "Yep, we'll send some to you." And so a police cruiser shows up with 2 officers inside that Derek recognized. They were senior to him. And they got out and he explained again what happened. And they kind of gave him a hard time for getting catfish Ed on his very first date. But at the same time, they knew it could have gone really badly. And so they decide they're going to load up in the police cruiser together, all 3 of them, and doctor back up to the park. And so they get up to the park and Derek points ahead and he goes, "That's the van. It's still here." And so they drive up and they stop short of the van. And the 2 uniformed officers, they turn to Derek and they're like, "Just stay in here. We're going to go check this van out." And so Derek's sitting in the car watching these guys go up to the vehicle, guns drawn. They're looking all around, they're clearing behind the vehicle, they're looking in the wood line. There's nobody there. And at some point, he sees them put their pistols away, and they go in the van. They're kind of shining with their flashlights all around, they're looking in the back, looking in the front, and then after a few minutes, they walk back to the cruiser. And as soon as they got in, Derek could tell there was just something off about how they were acting. They were down at the gas station, they were kind of joking around with him. Now, whatever they had seen in the van was definitely not something they were gonna joke about. And they turned to him and they're like, "The back of the van. Ugh." There was just knives and saws and pistols and rifles and lighter fluid and chains and handcuffs and duct tape. It was just awful. And it looks like there might even be blood on the ground. The 2 officers immediately called an additional backup, and before long, it was a full-fledged circus around this van of a crime scene investigation unit and other police officers. Spotlights set up, and they went out looking in the woods for these people, but they never found the guy. They never found the girl. And Derek would tell the other investigators, "Hey, she works at this hair salon like right down the road. I picked her up there." And so they went over to the hair salon and they wound up talking to the people there. And they said, "We've never heard of Leah." And when they showed them a picture of Leah, they were like, "We've never seen her before." And so they came back and they told Derek, "Look, she's a con artist in this whole thing. Your whole relationship with her has been her setting you up in some way, shape, or form the entire thing. That's all it ever was." And so for Derek, that was crushing, and he swore off Tinder immediately. He did not want to do any more online dating. But what really haunts him more than just being taken advantage of is, what would have happened if I wasn't concealed carrying? Would I have wound up in the back of that van? In the summer of 2019, a grandmother named Barbara was looking after her grandkids for the weekend while her daughter and her husband were out of town. Her daughter had 3 kids, 2 that were under the age of 6 and 1 who was 15 years old, and her name was Alyssa. And so, anytime Barbara was looking after her grandkids for longer than just a single day, like if she was taking care of them overnight, she would just stay at their house so as not to disrupt their lives more than she needed to. And so, their house was a modest, single-story home in a nice suburb of Dallas, Texas, where the crime rate is basically 0 and everybody in the neighborhood knows each other. And so this particular night that she's over there looking after them was like any other. She put the 2 young ones to bed first, and then she and Alyssa stayed up a little bit later in the kitchen chatting, talking about school, before ultimately both of them went to bed. So because their house is a single-story home, all the bedrooms are on the only floor of the house. And so Barbara and Alyssa's rooms were right next to each other, looking out to the side of the property. And so as soon as Barbara got in her room, she opened up the window that was right next to her bed, because as a kid she always slept with the window open. And even though her daughter's house had air conditioning, she preferred to keep the window open. So windows open, she has a screen that's in her window, and Barbara crawls into bed and she falls asleep at about 3. Barbara, wakes up to the sound of rustling coming from outside of her window. So she hears it, but it sounds an awful lot like it's probably just a dog or a cat or, some other animal that's in the area. It did not seem like a big deal to her, and she was just gonna forget about it. But then she heard it again, and it sounded much more like footsteps. And they sounded heavy enough that it probably couldn't be a dog or a cat. And so she rolled over onto her elbows and she pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out the screen door. And so the moon was out, so there was pretty good illumination. And so she could clearly see the side of the house. She could see the side of the house, she could see the fence that separated their property and their neighbors. And then she could see the neighbor's house and all their lights are off. And she noticed propped up against the fence, on their side of the fence, so on their property, was this bike that she didn't recognize. And she's looking at it thinking, is that Alyssa's bike? It's too big to be either of the 6-year-old's bikes. Whose bike is that? And as she's looking at the bike, she hears more rustling coming from the left, which is closer to Alyssa's room. Barbara presses her face up against the screen to try to look out the window towards the left, because whatever is making the sound is now out of her view. And as she's got her face pressed up against the screen trying to look, she sees a boy emerge from the bushes from right underneath Alyssa's room. He's got that high school Letterman jacket, like the classic, football jacket that high school kids wear. He comes out of the bushes wearing that, and he's got his hood pulled up. He doesn't look over at her. He's just backing up away from Alyssa's room and he's looking up into Alyssa's room. And so Barbara immediately thinks, okay, this guy is probably one of Alyssa's friends, maybe a boyfriend. I don't know. And Alyssa must have invited him over. Maybe she invited him when she knew her parents were going to be out of town, but before I said I was gonna be here to look after them. And that message didn't get past to him. And so he's here. All these scenarios are going through Barbara's head, but all she knew is she's not going to call the cops on some teenage kid who's coming to say hi to Alyssa. Instead, she's going to confront him, because Barbara was actually a high school teacher and had been for decades. And so she'd had lots of run-ins with badly behaved teenagers, and she was pretty good at standing her ground and being firm and kind of getting teenagers to listen to her. So she figured she would just go out there and be stern with him and he'd get the message. And so she quietly gets off of her bed, she walks out of her room to the front of the house. So he's over here side of the house, she's going to the front of the house. She flips on the lights as soon as she's outside and she quickly walks around to the edge of the porch where she can poke her head over and see, right down the side of the house where this kid's gonna be. So she pokes her head over and she goes, "Can I help you?" And this kid turns and looks at her for the first time, and immediately Barbara's like, oh whoa, he is not a teenager. He looks like he's in his 22nd, if not 32nd. No matter what, he is a lot older than Alyssa, and it caught her so off guard she didn't really know how to react to it. She was just looking at this guy who looks so much older, but he's got a bike and he's wearing a Letterman jacket. And so Barbara is a little bit confused, and so she's thinking to herself, okay, it's possible that he could just be one of those kids that looks a lot older than he really is. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she's thinking, this doesn't feel right. This feels like a grown man is trying to get into the house. And so as she's thinking about this, she's also registering that this guy, he seems completely unfazed. He's just looking up at her and he actually starts taking steps towards her to the point where Barbara says, stop where you are. And he does. And he looks up at her and he says, I'm looking for Alyssa. Is she home? And so, as Barbara is just glaring at this guy, hoping that will be enough to get him to leave, but he's not leaving, it occurs to her that this could be a misunderstanding. And so, thinking on her feet, she says to him, who did you say you're looking for? Lisa. Without any hesitation, he goes, no, I'm looking for Alyssa McCarran. She lives here. Barbara went silent for a second because he was right. That was her name, and she certainly was Hero. But she did not want him coming anywhere near the house until she had a chance to talk to Alyssa and confirm that she had invited him here, or at the very minimum that she knew who he was. And so Barbara says to the guy, I need you to stay right there. It's 3:00 in the morning. I don't know you. Give me a minute, I'll be right back. And he appears to get the message. And so Barbara went back inside the house. She shut and locked the door behind her. And then she went into Alyssa's room and she shook her foot to wake her up. And so Alyssa kind of sits up and she's looking around and she's like, what's going on? And Barbara looks at her and she's kind of annoyed with how the night's gone. And at this point, she's kind of blaming Alyssa for probably having invited this strange creep over to their house in the middle of the night. And she says to Alyssa, did you invite a boy here tonight? And Alyssa's like, no. Alyssa's like, what are you talking about? Barbara narrowed her eyes and she said, well, there's a boy outside that clearly knows you. He asked for you by name and he knows you live here, and he's outside right now. Can you please go out there and tell him that coming over unannounced at 3:00 in the morning is not very polite and he shouldn't do it again? Alyssa's confused and she's looking at her grandmother like, what are you talking about? And so she leans back and she opens the curtain of her window and she looks outside. And immediately she pulls her head back and then she says, Grandma, he asked for me by name. And Barbara's like, yeah, he said Alyssa McCarran lives here. And Alyssa's like, we have to call 911. I've never seen him before in my life. Suddenly everything made sense for Barbara. This was a stranger. This is not a friend. This is probably a grown man and he was probably trying to break into Alyssa's room. So as she's having this realization, they both hear footsteps out on the front porch. And at this, Barbara goes into full protective grandmother mode and she tells Alyssa, stay in your bed. Do not move. And Barbara runs out of her room. She goes into her bedroom and she shuts that window and locks it, and then runs to the front of the house to make sure the door was locked, because she thought she locked it when she came in, but she wasn't 100% sure. She gets right in front of it. She can see that it's locked. And now she's standing right on the other side of the door, kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. And this guy is standing on the porch but obscured. She can't see him, cause he's on the other side of the door. And it's silent for a second. And as she's standing there just waiting for something to happen, she hears knocking on the door. And it startled her when she heard it. And she yelled out, there's no Alyssa McCarran here. You have the wrong house. You need to leave or I'm calling the police. And the knocking stops for a second, and he says, I know Alyssa lives here. Tell her to come outside. He goes back to knocking. And Barbara picks up her phone and she calls 911, and she intentionally talks really loudly into the phone, making it very obvious she is calling the police. And very clearly this guy picked up on what Barbara was doing because the knocking stopped. And she saw him through the little slit of glass next to the door run to the left of the house back towards the side where his bike was. And so Barbara, while on the phone, runs into the bedroom where she was sleeping and she looks out the side window. And the last she sees of this guy is riding his bike across the street, and then he stops next to an SUV. And he opens a trunk and he throws the bike in the trunk, and he gets in the passenger side of the car and they drive off. Which means whatever he had planned to do with Alyssa, or whatever he was doing this night, he had an accomplice. The police show up a couple minutes later, and at this point, this creep and whoever he was with are long gone. But Barbara still gives her description of the vehicle and description of the night and what happened. And the police told her that over the past couple of weeks, they've gotten very similar reports from other households where there are young girls inside of the households. Apparently, this boy was actually a grown man that would use social media to figure out where kids lived, and then he would dress up like a teenager, and then he would dress up like a teenager, and then would go stalk them. And so, whatever Alyssa had listed online, he had been able to deduce that she lived there. And who knows how long he had been looking in the window at her at night. In 2018, an up-and-coming Instagram influencer named Wendy was contacted by a hotel in Miami, Florida, that wanted to see if she'd be willing to stay at their property over Memorial Day weekend. They said they were willing to cover all of her expenses as long as she was willing to post a couple of times while she was at the hotels, showing off how great the hotel was. They also told her to bring along a female friend and that friend, they would cover all of her expenses as well. Even though Wendy didn't know if she had any girlfriends that would want to do this with her. She was so eager to take them up on this opportunity because she was trying to make being an influencer be her full-time job. And so opportunities like this were huge for her. And so she said yes even before she knew if she could bring along a friend like they asked her to. And so sure enough, over the next couple of days, as she reached out to her network to see if there's any females that wanted to come with her, everybody was either busy or wasn't that interested, or they had plans. And so, since she did not want to cancel, she thought, well, it can't be that big of a deal if I bring along a male friend. And so she reached out to her good friend Mitch, who's this 6'4" athletic guy who was just one of her close friends, and she said, hey, would you mind coming along with me to this thing in Miami over Memorial Day weekend? I need someone to go with me. They asked for a female, but you're gonna have to do it. And so Mitch agreed to do it. And Wendy thought to herself, well, worst case scenario is they're not willing to pay for Mitch's, expenses, and that she would pay for them. And she told Mitch as much. And so they thought that was just fine. They figured that was a good solution. And so the day arrives, and Wendy and Mitch are really excited about this trip. They don't often get to go travel around as influencers. And so they hop on a plane, they fly first class to Miami. When they get there, they go down, they get their baggage claim, and then they go out to the curb. And right away, Wendy sees there's this really well-dressed guy with dark sunglasses on. And he's holding up a sign that has her last name on it and the logo of the hotel on it. And so she waves to him and walks over, and Mitch is following right behind. And this guy looks at her and he says, okay, well, where's your friend? And that's when she says, well, actually, I brought Mitch because none of my girlfriends wanted to go, so I brought Mitch along, Mitch. And so this guy lowers his sunglasses and he looks at Mitch, and he kind of looks up and down. And he puts his sunglasses back and he turns and he walks towards this beautiful black SUV that's parked right up against the curb. And so Wendy and Mitch follow him. And this guy opens up the back door and Wendy and Mitch get in. The guy takes the luggage and puts it in the back of the vehicle and shuts it. And as soon as Wendy and Mitch sit inside of this car, the driver is visibly upset. He's kind of ranting on driving, and the front passenger window was down. And so Wendy and Mitch assumed he must be yelling at someone outside of the vehicle, like this guy that had just picked him up. You must be communicating with him somehow. He can't possibly be yelling at us. We just got here. We don't know him. But sure enough, as they kind of are tuning into what he's saying, he's a very thick accent and he's saying, where's the other girl? You're not supposed to have a guy. It's two girls. Not one girl, one guy. It's two girls. Where is the other girl? As Wendy is hearing this, she feels so uncomfortable. Not just for herself, but for Mitch too, because she asked him to come along and had said, oh, it won't be a big deal. They won't mind. But, clearly they do mind. And so Wendy's trying to explain to the driver that, I know you asked for a female friend, but I didn't have a female friend and so I brought him along. I will pay for him. I'm not asking you guys to pay for him. I'll pay for everything that he touches. I'll pay for his hotel, his flight, everything. But the driver didn't seem that upset about who was paying for Mitch. His frustration came from a place of being frustrated, like they weren't going to be able to do whatever they had planned to do because now Mitch is in the mix. And so as Wendy and the driver kind of go back and forth, and the driver's getting more and more frustrated. The guy that had originally greeted Wendy and Mitch hopped in the front seat and he and the driver started arguing with each other in Portuguese. So, for about a minute, Wendy and Mitch are looking at each other like, what is going on here? And these guys are yelling at each other. And then they stop, and the driver turns around again and one more time he says to Wendy, where is the other girl? And Wendy says, there is no other girl. It is Mitch and I. That is it. At this point, the driver makes a sound like he was disgusted with both of them, and he raises his hand up like this and he turns to face the road in front. And the guy that had originally greeted Wendy and Mitch, he gets out of the passenger seat, goes around to the back, opens the back of the truck, takes their luggage out, throws it onto the curb, goes to the door that is closest to Mitch, opens it up, and he tells them to get out. And so Wendy and Mitch climb back out onto the curb. The guy shuts the door behind them. He hops back in the front seat, and that car peels away. That was it. At this point, Wendy's thinking to herself, I bet those two guys have nothing to do with the hotel and the people that I have been communicating with to set this whole thing up. I bet they are just the drivers and they weren't old to pick up the girls. And we showed up with a girl and a guy and it screwed them up and they got mad. And they got really mad, I guess, and then they left. And so, I bet if I can just get in touch with the people at the hotel, the people I had spoken to, that they can clear this whole thing up. And so she opens up her email and she sends a message to Marissa, who was one of the people at the hotel that she had been going back and forth with when she was buying her plane ticket. And then she sent another message to the Instagram account that had over 10,000 followers that she had been going back and forth with quite a bit, that had actually originally reached out to her. So for a couple of minutes, Wendy is watching her phone waiting for a response, and at some point Mitch says to her, you know, by the time we get a response to either your Instagram DM or your email, we probably could have just taken an Uber over to the hotel and spoken to them directly. So why don't we just go do that? And so they agree. They hop in an Uber and they drive the short distance to this hotel. And as soon as they get out, Wendy notices something that, at the time, did not seem like a big deal, which was the logo of the hotel. The one in real life, right in front of her, it was a little bit different than the one that is on the Instagram page, the one she'd been talking back and forth with. That was their profile picture. It's different than the one in real life. And so that stood out to her just because she'd looked at that page a number of times, but it was definitely the same hotel. And so she didn't think much of it, and she and Mitch walked inside, right up to the front desk. And Wendy asked to speak with a manager, and shortly thereafter, a manager comes out and she asks Wendy and Mitch to come into her office. Go inside, and she says, okay, guys, what's going on? What do you need? And so Wendy explains the framework of the deal she had negotiated with Marissa, and she said, look, you know, when I got to the airport, the guys that picked us up were incredibly rude and they wouldn't give us a ride here. And I just want to let you know what happened. You know, we don't care. We got a ride here. But we just figured you should know. And the woman looks at her kind of puzzled and she says, who is the person you talked to is? You said Marissa. And Wendy's like, yeah, Marissa. She's the marketing person here. And the manager looks at her and she says, no, I'm the marketing person, and my name is Kelly. I think you're at the wrong hotel because we don't have any influencers that are here right now, and I would have known about this. Wendy can't believe it, and she pulls up the Instagram page she's been talking to and she shows it to the manager. And the manager takes it and she's pretty surprised by what she's looking at, and she's like, this is our old account. We deleted this, or I thought we deleted this. We have a new one because we rebranded. We have a brand new logo. Everything's new, and we just felt like we'd start fresh. So I don't know who owns this account now, but that is our account. It's just we don't use it anymore. I don't know how anyone got a hold of it. At this point, it clicked for Wendy that this whole thing was a facade, that this whole time she was being conned. And what really scared her is to what end. What were they trying to do with her? Had she shown up with the other female friend, what would they have done with her? But at this moment, Wendy just feels totally overwhelmed by the entire moment. She's so embarrassed that she thought this was real and she dragged Mitch along and this whole thing was just fake. She's so embarrassed that she just approached this manager who basically said that's all fake, and so she just wanted to leave. And so she stands up and she says, you know, I'm really sorry for wasting your time to the manager, and she and Mitch leave. She goes outside and she just sits down and she's crying. And Mitch says, hey, you know, you really ought to call the police and let them know this happened. Because, you know, clearly there were plans for you and, you know, had you brought a female friend in, they can't have been good plans. I think you need to let the police know that this scam exists. And so Wendy does call the police and she explains what happened. And she's surprised when they say, hey, where are you right now? We'd love to send a detective over to you to talk to you a little bit more about what happened. And so Wendy tells them where they aren't, She's a little bit surprised that they want to send a detective over to talk about this because in her mind, this isn't that big of a deal. I mean, it's a big deal to her and to Mitch, but nothing really happened. But either way, they go sit on the bench right outside the hotel and they wait for the detective to show up. And just a couple of minutes later, he does. He walks up, he introduces himself, and he says, "Hey, let's go inside and grab a table and we can chat." And so they go inside and they sit down and Wendy and Mitch go over their story one more time. And after they're done, the detective says, "Look, I don't mean to scare you, but I do want you to understand just how serious of a situation you guys were just in. So in Miami, human traffickers use these phony hotel Instagram accounts to attract young women like yourself to Miami in order to be trafficked. And so they will buy these old business Instagram accounts from companies that have either rebranded or who are going out of business. They'll pay top dollar to acquire those Instagram accounts and then they will use them in order to get people like you to come to Miami. And so, probably the only reason they didn't follow through on their operation is because you brought Mitch along, who posed a threat to them. And so, that's why they were upset with you, and that's why they decided it wasn't worth it. So even though this must have been incredibly traumatic for you, I'm sure you were spared a much worse fate." So that's gonna do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you found the secret somewhere in the video, tell us in the comments what it is and where you found it. Give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we will pin you at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, remember, the like button does not use NordVPN or any VPN for that matter. So please hack their computer and steal their identity. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok, where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's gonna do it. See you.